Hey there, sleepless rabble. Let me take over for a while. Tonight's sleep story isn't about peace or serenity or any of that spiritual fluff. It's about bones. Holy bones. Or at least, bones that claim to be holy. Because back in the Middle Ages, nothing boosted your status quite like owning a splinter from the true cross, or a dried toenail from Jesus himself. And if you didn't have one, well, you just made one. The relic trade was medieval Europe's version of Bitcoin. Unregulated, faith based, and absolutely bursting with potential. No blockchain, no proof, just sheep bones in velvet boxes, and a whole lot of marketing. So tonight, we'll explore how religion met capitalism in the most bizarre way possible. We'll follow the scent of incense, the clink of coin purses, and the soft, suspicious glow of holy fingernails. And we'll ask the real question: what's worth more? A relic soaked in myth, or a JPEG with a roadmap? But before we dive in, soft emphasis. You know the drill. If you enjoy this strange little corner of history, like the video. Subscribe to Napmax for more sleep stories that are anything but boring. And leave a comment. What's the weirdest sacred object your country still keeps on display? A toe? A tooth? A piece of underwear? I want to know. And if you want to support what we do, the writing, the research, the ridiculousness, you can buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com/napmax. It keeps the relics polished. And the stories coming. This is Napmax Sleep Stories. And you're listening to The Holy Toe, How Sheep Bones Became the Bitcoin of the Middle Ages. Let's begin with a bone. Not a big, impressive one. Not a skull or femur or rib cage wrapped in gold. Number A, pinky toe. Dried, curled, roughly the size of a plum pit. Now picture it lying in a box, lined with faded red velvet, a golden frame, a glass lid, and a small scroll next to it that reads, Ex ossibus sanctissimi Domini nostri Iesu Christi, from the bones of our most holy Lord Jesus Christ. The toe of Jesus, right there, in rural Bavaria. How did it get there? Well, no one really asked. Because in the Middle Ages, relics weren't about truth. They were about hope, about status, about business. And business was booming. See, back then, Europe wasn't exactly thriving. You had plagues, famines, a literacy rate hovering somewhere around, my cousin can read the letter A. People were scared. Life was short. And the church? The church promised salvation. But only if you followed the rules, and paid the right fees, and maybe visited the right relic. Relics were access points, gateways, spiritual fast tracks. A good relic could draw thousands of pilgrims, and each one brought candles, offerings, pockets full of coins. They didn't have hotels or souvenirs, but monasteries had donation boxes, and miracles. Lots of miracles. Some even on demand. Now, not every church had a relic. And that was a problem. Because no relic meant no pilgrims. No pilgrims meant no money. And no money meant that your monks were sitting around eating moss stew and patching their robes with sheep hair. So what do? You make one. You dig up a bone. You dip it in holy oil. You sprinkle in some incense ash, wrap it in cloth, and write up a backstory. This was discovered by a shepherd guided by an angel. It glowed for 3 days and cured a widow's ankle. Totally legitimate. Soon, relics were popping up everywhere. Saints' fingers, saints' teeth, the toenails of martyrs, a piece of bread from the Last Supper, a feather from the Holy Spirit, which was just a pigeon feather, dyed red and glued to a bit of parchment. But hey, it worked. People came, people paid, and no one asked too many questions. The relic trade became an arms race, a holy competition. Who could have the rarest, weirdest, most convincing sacred object? One church claimed to have the breath of the Virgin Mary sealed in a bottle. Another displayed the beard of Christ, carefully combed, tied with a ribbon, and smelling faintly of rosemary and mold. In Germany, a monk toured with a thumb of Saint Anne, which somehow resembled a turnip. But it healed arthritis, allegedly. Then there was the holy prepuce, that's right, the foreskin of Jesus. Multiple churches had one. All claimed it was the original, because apparently sacred genital tissue was very, very marketable. And just like crypto, the more absurd it got, the more people wanted in. It wasn't about what was real. It was about what was rare, what was blessed, what was branded. A toe in a box could elevate a village into a destination. A vial of holy milk could finance a cathedral. A splinter from the true cross could put your town on the Pope's pilgrimage map. Beat. Even if that splinter came from your church's old broom handle. Everyone wanted a miracle, and if they couldn't have one, they'd buy the next best thing. It was spiritual hype, and like all hype, it needed influencers. And who better than kings? St. Louis of France bought the crown of thorns, not a replica, not a souvenir, the actual crown. He paid a fortune, more than some wars cost. Then built an entire chapel just to house it. Sainte-Chapelle, a jewel-box cathedral. Built not for prayer, but for flexing. Because nothing says divine humility like stained glass, imported marble, and 12 guards watching over a thorny twig. Other kings followed suit. They traded relics like crypto whales swapping ape NFTs. One gifted a saint's knuckle as a wedding present. Another promised a tooth from John the Baptist in exchange for land rights. It wasn't religion. It was brand building. A relic made your kingdom look chosen, blessed, unquestionable, just like blue check marks today. And naturally, with fame came forgery, scams, duplicates, relics that conveniently multiplied whenever someone made a big enough donation. One priest famously discovered 7 different holy umbilical cords over the course of a single Lent. Another toured Europe with a piece of Jesus's baby blanket that suspiciously looked like someone's old tablecloth with embroidery added after the fact. Miracles were forged. Healings were staged. Relics wept on cue thanks to cleverly hidden vinegar sponges, and a dramatic monk with a shaky voice. Behold, the statue weeps. Donate now and be blessed. You'd think that holiness might come wrapped in light or thunder or some glorious choral swell echoing through the heavens. But sometimes it arrives in a wooden box that smells faintly of sheep and mildew. Inside, nestled in worn silk and decades of very questionable reverence, was a toe. Not just any toe, of course. This one was holy. They said it belonged to Saint Bartholomew, which, frankly, was always a bit convenient, considering his entire body had already been claimed by 3 separate churches and at least 1 monastery that could barely spell his name. But that didn't matter, because here, in this dim stone chapel that echoed more with coins than prayers, the toe was real. It had to be. And people believed. Of course they did. They stood in line for hours, peasants, merchants, even the occasional baron with gout and guilt. They knelt. They wept. They dropped coins into the box like they were investing in eternal life. Because in the Middle Ages, the afterlife was less a concept, and more of a business model. A terrifying one. You sinned, you burned, unless You had a backup plan. Something sacred. Something with a story. Enter the relic. The church didn't invent marketing, but it came pretty damn close. Take one dead saint, break him into portable parts, label generously, apply miracles as needed, then send the word out. Come touch the toe, kiss the bone, buy the blessing. Spiritual fulfillment, starting at just one silver coin. The chapel that housed this particular digit was modest. Stone walls, no heating, and a monk at the door who looked like he'd seen too many winters and too few honest pilgrims. But the air inside was thick with hope, and maybe mold. Candles flickered. Dust floated like blessings in disguise. And in the center, there it was, perched on a velvet pillow, encased in glass, one perfectly petrified toe, slightly curled, surprisingly long, decidedly sheep-like. Now, no one dared say it aloud. No one leaned in and whispered, "Wait a minute, is that mutton?" Because to question the toe was to question the system. And in this system, belief was currency. That's the thing about relics. They weren't about the object. They were about the story. The monk would tell it in hushed tones, to wide eyes and aching knees, how the toe had healed a blind girl in Genoa, how it once dripped blood during a drought, how a thief who tried to steal it went mute for life and now swept floors in silence nearby as divine punishment. And each miracle added value. Each tale was another notch in the toe's holy stock. Forget Bitcoin. This was divine crypto, untraceable, unverifiable, yet somehow priceless. And oh, did the people buy in. They left chickens, coins, jewelry. One woman even offered her hair, claiming it was virgin blonde. The monk accepted, naturally. Hair made excellent candle wicks. The toe became the town's treasure. Pilgrims came from miles away. The inn filled up. Merchants thrived. The tavern even named a beer after it. St. Toe's Elixir, a dark, yeasty ale with suspicious floaties. And as the crowds grew, so did the stories. A child touched the toe and no longer stuttered. A man with boils claimed they disappeared overnight. A donkey bowed once in its presence, and each event, no matter how mundane or wildly improbable, was recorded, embroidered, and sold on parchment in the gift shop. Because belief is a business, and nothing sells quite like salvation. And so the toe reigned, one brittle sacred phalanx at the center of a booming economy of fear, faith, and clever storytelling. But it was only the beginning, because in a world desperate for divine contact, the toe was just the first click in a centuries-long chain of holy transactions. Before the toe, there was just need. The aching kind. The quiet kind. The kind of need that creeps in when crops fail, when children die young, when thunder sounds too close and your priest is the only one who can read. The Middle Ages weren't just dark because of the lighting. They were terrifying. You could live a perfectly decent life, till a fever, a cough, or a questionable piece of cheese took you out before 30. People were poor, afraid, devout, mostly by necessity. And the church had answers. Not good ones, mind you, but answers with structure and stained glass. To survive that world, you didn't need logic. You needed favor. Divine favor, preferably, because justice on earth was spotty at best. If your neighbor's pig got sick, maybe you had sinned. If your crops failed, maybe you hadn't donated enough to Saint Eligius. If your wife miscarried, well, God moves in mysterious ways, but he also seemed to move faster if you made a generous offering. So you prayed, You lit candles, you clutched at saints the way modern people clutch crystals and discount codes, and slowly, a whole system emerged. A marketplace of grace, holy supply, meet unholy demand. What started with genuine relics, real bits of saints, or what was probably them, turned into a holy free-for-all. Finger bones, tunic threads, locks of hair. A jar of tears allegedly wept by the Virgin Mary during a particularly emotional passion play. And if a bone didn't quite look human, well, saints had strange bodies, miraculous ones, longer toes, maybe. The beautiful thing, and I mean this in the darkest possible way, is that no one could really prove anything. There were no forensics, no carbon dating, no Reddit threads exposing holy scams. All you had was a monk with a candle, and a story. And humans love stories. It didn't take long for monasteries to realize that bones meant business. And once something becomes profitable, it becomes scalable. There were traveling bone merchants, reliquary artisans, saint dealers, entire guilds who crafted velvet-lined boxes to hold bits of elbow and toenail, each one lovingly carved, kissed by clergy, and possibly sprinkled with powdered lamb to boost authenticity. Supply boomed. Even if you didn't have a real relic, you could still sell the experience. Touch the cloth that once wrapped the jawbone of a man who had once seen the toe of St. Thomas. 2 degrees of holy separation. Faith became a funnel. A divine pyramid scheme with the bones of long-dead martyrs at the top, and peasant wallets at the bottom. And just like with any good hype cycle, the ones who got in early built cathedrals. So when the Holy Toe arrived on the scene, the world was ready. People were primed. They wanted to believe in something, anything. And if that something happened to look suspiciously like the joint of a lamb roast, well, blessed are the hungry. And while the toe basked in candlelit glory, other relics began crawling out of the woodwork, some glorious, some grotesque, some aggressively imaginative. Because when salvation is a collectible, pause, everyone wants to mint their own. They were the influencers of their time, not the saints. They were long gone, bless them, but the relics, and those who carried them. Imagine a robed man stepping into your village. He's barefoot, blinking against the smoke of your chimney fires, dragging a cart behind him with a velvet-covered box that smells faintly of cloves and mildew. He speaks slowly, reverently, with the kind of voice you only hear in candlelit confessionals or overpriced meditation apps. And when he opens the box, there it is. A scrap of cloth, a finger bone, a splinter, polished like glass. He says, "This is a thorn from Christ's crown." And you, starving, tired, guilty over that thing you said to your neighbor's goat, you believe him. Because relics didn't need proof. They needed presence. And just like that, the crowd gathers. Coins drop. Blessings flow. And somewhere in the corner, a local innkeeper raises his prices for the night. You see, in a world without Wi-Fi or Wall Street, holy objects were the assets that mattered. They held value, real, emotional, eternal value. And like any good speculative market, it didn't matter what the object was, it mattered what it meant. Which is how the hairbrush of Mary Magdalene and the foreskin of baby Jesus could both be considered blue-chip investments. Despite, logistical issues, the relic trade boomed, and with it came the rise of the middleman, not unlike your modern crypto bros, but with more incense and fewer tweets. These were the monks who curated collections, the bishops who made exclusivity deals, the nobles who bought relics not for prayer, but for power. Owning a relic wasn't just holy, it was political. If your city had a saint's school, pilgrims came. If pilgrims came, Markets thrived. If markets thrived, taxes rose. And if taxes rose, well, that cathedral wasn't going to build itself. But supply is a funny thing. The more people believed, the more relics appeared. Miraculously. Some saints were dismembered so thoroughly you could build an entire congregation from their spare parts. It was said that there were enough pieces of the true cross scattered across Europe to reconstruct a small fleet of fishing boats, and no one asked questions, or if they did, they were usually ignored or silenced, depending on how loud they were. In some cases, relics were manufactured locally, a sheep bone here, a cat's paw there, add a little incense, a dramatic story, and a monk with a gift of performance. And voila, instant miracle. You might think people would notice, but humans don't want truth. They want narrative, and narrative is what relics delivered. Beautiful, glittering, emotionally urgent stories that said, you are loved, you are seen, you are saved if you donate generously, or light a candle, or kiss the glass, or leave behind your last silver piece just in case. And so relics became the medieval version of the verified badge, the ultimate flex, the original link in bio, a way of saying, this city is blessed, this bishop has influence, this town matters. And at the center of it all stood the holy toe, quiet, still, soaked in candle smoke and whispered praise. Just one bone, but backed by centuries of fear, storytelling, and faith you could hold in your hand. But fame has its price, and competition was coming. Because in a world where sheep bones could become holy, everyone wanted in on the trade. At first glance, it didn't look like much. Roughly the length of your little finger, curled slightly at the tip, yellowed like forgotten ivory. Not especially toe-like, not especially holy either. And yet, people wept in its presence. They'd shuffle forward, knees sore from stone and sin, clutching children or crumpled prayers. A monk would raise the glass lid slowly, reverently, as if revealing the Ark of the Covenant, not a brittle hunk of what might very well have been dinner 2 weeks ago. And still, the silence it drew, the stillness, it was electric, sacred, wrapped in the kind of awe that only exists when everyone agrees not to ask questions. They called it the Toe of Bartholomew. No one dared call it fake, not out loud. Because who were you to say what a saint's toe should look like? Maybe toes did look different back then. Maybe this one had been sanctified beyond recognition. God works in mysterious ways, especially on cartilage. And besides, it had a certificate. A carefully aged parchment, stamped with something vaguely resembling an archbishop's seal. Written in Latin so poorly it could have been French after wine. But it didn't matter. People don't need authenticity. They need authority. And this toe had been declared holy by people with robes and rings and incense. So it had to be true. The miracles came quickly. A woman touched the glass and claimed her back pain vanished. A farmer brought a sick lamb that bleated once and then walked away, perfectly healthy. A blind man said he saw a flicker of light when he passed the chapel. The town scribe carefully recorded each one, in gold leaf when possible, because miracles were marketing, and the more you had, the more pilgrims came. The town changed, stalls popped up near the chapel, selling candles, prayer ribbons, roasted nuts. One particularly enterprising baker started shaping his loaves like toes. They sold out every day. A relic-themed festival was declared. Once a year, they'd carry the toe through the streets, veiled in silk, perfumed with frankincense, Children would throw rose petals, drums would play, and somewhere behind the pageantry, someone always collected the donations. Discreetly, reverently, consistently, and oh, the competition. Neighbouring towns watched with thin smiles and sharper envy. One claimed they had a tooth from St. Paul. Another announced a freshly discovered sandal fragment from St. Peter himself, complete with embedded desert dust. A third got creative. The jawbone of St. Margaret, found inside a hollow statue during renovations. The statue, by the way, had been commissioned 2 weeks prior. It was relic warfare, a quiet arms race of bones, cloths, nails, and divine debris. Whoever had the best relic won. Won pilgrims, won power, won the illusion of proximity to God. And the toe, that humble little object, held its ground. It was a strange kind of fame, one made not of light or legacy, but of silence, suggestion, and an audience that needed it to be real. Because deep down, no one was really kissing the toe. They were kissing the hope that somewhere, someone was still watching over them. But hope, as it turns out, can be bottled and sold. And as the legend of the toe grew, so too did the business of miracles. Increasingly elaborate, suspiciously convenient, and wildly profitable. Supply was, as always, the real miracle. Because for every toe encased in glass, there were 100 others waiting in the wings. Some more authentic than others. Some, if we're being honest, never attached to anything remotely saint-like. But that was the beauty of the market. No ID check, no barcode, just bones and belief. And oh, the creativity. Monks became master forgers. Not in the criminal sense, not exactly. More like interpretive artists of the divine. If God didn't provide a relic, they simply helped him out. Sheep bones were boiled, scraped, blessed, and tucked into ornate reliquaries. Pig teeth became the molars of martyrs, and chicken bones, apparently excellent stand-ins for knuckles. The formula was simple. Take a convincing object, pair it with a compelling story, add incense, repeat as needed. It was a scalable model. And Europe, bless its bruised and bandaged heart, had no shortage of suffering. Wherever there was illness, fear, infertility, or rats the size of cats, there was demand. One relic, displayed in a chapel outside Prague, was simply labelled the breath of St. Agnes. It came in a sealed jar. Nobody opened it, ever. Which, frankly, was for the best. But people came anyway, to gaze upon the condensation and inhale the idea of sanctity. Another claimed to be the tears of St. Veronica. Stored in a small silver vial, it was said to weep on command. Which it did. With surprising regularity, usually after the chapel's side door had been opened briefly and the humidity spiked. Somewhere, someone was spritzing holy water like it was a perfume demo at a medieval Sephora. There was even a relic that made it into the annals of serious history. The Holy Prepuce. Yes, a foreskin, allegedly belonging to Christ. Multiple foreskins, actually, at least 14 recorded across Europe, all vigorously defended by their respective churches. Theological explanations varied. Some claimed divine regeneration, others suggested miraculous bilocation, but most simply nodded, muttered mystery of faith, and passed the collection plate. It all worked. Not because it made sense, but because it filled a need. People didn't want logic. They wanted contact. A way to touch the divine. To own it even, in some small way. Even if it came in the form of a dubious bone fragment wrapped in gold leaf. And who are we to judge? Modern folks spend fortunes on NFTs, JPEGs of apes in sunglasses. They buy crystals blessed by influencers. They download apps that promise spiritual alignment with just 3 deep breaths and a $19.99 monthly fee. Same hunger, different interface. The relic market in its golden age was no different from today's hype cycles. New drops, exclusive launches, limited edition holiness, and always the story. Because without the story, it's just a bone, just a jar, just an object. But with the story, it becomes salvation. And the toe, our sacred, sheepy little superstar, continued to shine. Not because of what it was, but because of what people needed it to be. And as the miracle economy exploded, the toe would soon become part of a much larger game, one played by kings, cardinals, and kingdoms desperate for attention. It started with a weeping statue, a wooden Virgin Mary, eyes downcast, lips delicately carved, and on a particularly rainy morning, a tear. Just one. It slid down her cheek, shimmered in the candlelight, and landed silently on the altar linen. The priest gasped. The baker fainted. And by sunset, the entire town was on its knees. It was a miracle, a divine sign, a heavenly endorsement for a parish previously best known for its sheep dung and tax evasion. News spread fast, word of mouth mostly, the medieval version of going viral. Within a week, pilgrims were arriving by the cartload. Crutches were left behind, coins were dropped with theatrical reverence, and nearby merchants hastily adjusted their signage. Holy bread, baked within sight of the miracle, 10% surcharge, for God, of course. Now, whether the statue actually wept is debatable. Some suggested the roof leaked. Others whispered about onions in the incense. One very observant nun noticed that the priest always checked the statue just before it cried. But she was reassigned to a convent in the Alps shortly after voicing her theory. Silence is golden, especially when paired with a steady stream of donations. The toe, watching from its velvet perch across the region, took note. Not literally, of course, but its keepers certainly did. Because nothing sells quite like spectacle. And the people? They wanted a show. So, miracles became choreographed. A man entered the chapel, coughing dramatically. He staggered, leaned on a stick, wiped his brow, touched the toe, paused, then suddenly stood up straight, healed, gasps, weeping, coins. Later that evening, he was spotted behind the tavern, slipping the stick into a sack and whistling off into the darkness. A few silver pieces richer, performance art, faith-based theatre. Other relics joined the trend. A cloth said to contain drops of Christ's blood turned red every full moon. Unsurprisingly, it was kept next to a cleverly rigged wine bladder and a monk with decent aim. One church claimed their saint's femur glowed in the dark. It did, thanks to a curious mix of phosphorescent moss and blind optimism. And in France, a miracle spring popped up next to a statue of Saint Denis. The water was clear, refreshing, possibly laced with something that made people feel very forgiven, and occasionally a little dizzy. But no one wanted to question it, because miracles, real or not, gave people hope. And hope was a rare currency, stronger than gold, stronger than truth. You see, belief isn't about logic. It's about need. The mother praying for her dying child didn't care about forensic consistency. The farmer kneeling before the toe didn't ask for proof of origin. They asked for mercy, for healing, for just one thing in this brutal, mud-soaked world to go their way. And if it came in the form of a quietly sweating actor and a lamb bone in a fancy box, so be it. So the miracles multiplied. The toe glowed in stories, if not in fact, and the economy of faith kept rolling. Fueled by spectacle, sustained by silence, and guarded, always, by men in robes with very full pockets. But belief is a dangerous currency, and power always attracts kings. Because soon, the toe wouldn't just heal the sick or fool the gullible, it would enter the court of monarchs. It was only a matter of time before the kings came calling. Because relics, these fragile fragments of flesh and wood and faith, were no longer just tools for monks or trinkets for pilgrims. They had become something far more valuable. They had become influence. And power, as it turns out, smells opportunity from a continent away. It began with gifts. One monarch sent a chunk of saintly spine to another as part of a peace offering, delicately wrapped in silk and sealed with a wax crest, still warm from political desperation. Another king proudly paraded a reliquary filled with a splinter from the manger of Christ, which may or may not have originated from a stable just outside Naples. It didn't matter. The point wasn't truth. The point was prestige. You see, kings needed divine endorsement. Rule by sword was fine, but rule by God? That was irrefutable. Owning a powerful relic was like holding a direct line to heaven. A celestial endorsement that said, "This king is chosen. This rule is righteous. This tax hike is holy." And what better way to justify a war or a wedding or a sudden increase in grain tariffs than by waving a saint's rib around? The toe, of course, did not go unnoticed. Its fame had grown. So had the coin it generated. And when something makes money, people with crowns tend to notice. One duke sent an emissary to inquire politely whether the chapel might be interested in sharing the toe. For the good of the realm, of course, to boost morale, to win favor before a particularly difficult winter. The answer was no. 2 weeks later, the chapel mysteriously caught fire. The toe survived, miraculously and suspiciously, already packed in its travel case, lower amused. Miracles always knew when to pack light. Eventually the toe was acquired, not stolen, strictly speaking, but rehomed, under royal protection, guarded night and day by armed men with itchy chainmail and absolutely no sense of humor. It was installed in a new cathedral, larger, brighter, dripping in gold, and now the people came by the thousands. Pilgrims flooded the city, markets swelled, and the king smiled. He had done what every good leader does in a crisis. He bought a narrative, and then he monetized it. There were copycats, of course. Another king declared possession of St. Paul's voice box. Yes, the very thing he once preached with. Now preserved in divine silence inside a golden tube. A queen in the north claimed to have Mary Magdalene's veil, which, oddly, looked very similar to the table linen stolen from a monastery 6 years prior. And then there was the emperor who unveiled an entire arm, supposedly from St. George, fully armored, with fingers permanently clenched around a very suspicious sapphire. These weren't men of God. They were marketers, brand strategists with armies. They understood the economy of belief, and they knew that whoever owned the relic owned the people, and the people, tired, taxed, terrified, gave in. They kissed the gold. They sang the hymns. They paid their dues. Because somewhere deep inside, they still hoped that the bone was real, that the blessings were real, that their suffering meant something. even if it didn't. And so the toe, now polished, guarded, worshipped, became not just a relic, but a royal commodity. Not just a symbol of faith, but a cornerstone of propaganda. But what happens when too many relics flood the market? When every chapel has a skull, a tooth, a lock of hair, a glowing spoon? Ah, yes. Then comes the crash. It began slowly, as all crashes do, with whispers, with doubt, with a relic that didn't perform quite as expected. A woman came seeking healing for her leg. She touched the toe, knelt, wept. Nothing. The limp remained. Her husband, embarrassed, muttered something about charlatans and stormed out. And someone else heard him. There were too many relics now. Too many toes. Too many thumbs, skulls, spleens, scapulas, shrouds. If every village had a fragment of Christ's cross, you started to wonder just how large that cross really was. One bishop reportedly quipped that you could build an entire ark from all the authentic pieces. He was relocated shortly after, with enthusiasm. People started asking questions, not many at first, and never loudly, but still, they asked, how could St. Catherine's head be in 3 different cities? Why did one church claim to have all 12 of St. Peter's toes, when the human body, last anyone checked, came with a set of 10? And the biggest question of all, if relics were so powerful, why was everything still so awful? Because despite the pilgrimages, the prayers, the piles of silver, people still got sick, still starved, still buried their children in shallow, hurried graves. The economy of faith was bloated, oversaturated, and beginning to rot. Enter Martin Luther, a monk with opinions, sharp ones. He didn't just complain, he nailed his complaints to a door, publicly, loudly, dangerously. He called out the relics, the indulgences, the for-sale salvation system that had turned faith into a franchise. He didn't mention the toes specifically, but you could feel it twitch. The Reformation was the medieval version of a market crash. It wasn't just spiritual, it was financial. Pilgrimage routes dried up, relics were seized, smashed, or quietly retired. Chapels were emptied. The toe, once paraded through crowds like a celebrity, now sat behind 3 locks and an increasingly nervous priest. Donations fell. Candles dimmed. Miracles grew scarce. And yet, even as the bones lost their sparkle, some still believed. They clung to their rosaries, to their stories, to their last little hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd back the right saint. Because belief isn't rational. It isn't logical. It isn't even particularly efficient. It just is. And as the relic bubble burst, and the cathedrals counted their losses, a strange thing happened. People began to keep their own bones. Personal saints, family talismans, a lock of grandma's hair, a nail from the shed where Uncle Henry saw an angel after 3 ales and a head injury. Decentralized sanctity, holiness, gone grassroots. You might say the relic market didn't die, it just pivoted. And the toe? It was placed in storage, still wrapped in its silk, still labeled in Latin. It hadn't changed. But the world around it had. FOMO was out. Minimalism was in. But trends are cycles, and belief is eternal. And in time, someone would open that box again, dust it off, whisper a story, and wait for the coins to fall. When the smoke cleared, All that was left was silence and bones. So many bones. Not glowing anymore, not dripping holy tears, just dry, quiet, unloved. The churches that survived the Reformation took their relics away. In drawers, in boxes, in vaults beneath vaults. Some were burned. Some quietly buried like embarrassing secrets. But most just waited. Because someone someday would come looking. You can't kill belief, not really. You can scandalize it, reform it, rebrand it. But it always comes back. With a new face, a cleaner logo, and just enough nostalgia to make you forget why you walked away in the first place. And in time, the relics came back too. Not in cathedrals necessarily, but in museums, behind glass, labeled with little brass plaques and far too many question marks. People came, still, they stared, still, they whispered, still. Now they paid for tickets instead of the indulgences, bought postcards instead of prayers. But the impulse was the same. To touch something beyond themselves, even if it was with gloved hands and an audio guide. And in this quiet resurrection of reverence, something else stirred. Something familiar. No, not the toe, not yet, but a different kind of relic. A new artifact, born not of bone, but of code. You've seen them, maybe even bought one. A JPEG of a monkey, a cartoon cat with laser eyes, a pixelated loaf of bread wearing a crown. Non-fungible tokens, digital relics, minted in crypto, blessed by algorithms, promoted by influencers with ring lights and vague spiritual quotes in their bios, and priced sometimes at more than an entire medieval village was worth. It was all there again. The scarcity, the mystique, the desperate need to be first. Only 1,000 will ever exist. Join the whitelist. Own this and unlock miracles, or at least Discord access. Sound familiar? Because just like the toe, these modern relics didn't need utility. They needed narrative. You weren't buying a file. You were buying membership, identity, meaning. And just like relics, they had their miracles. A kid bought one early and made millions. Someone else claimed it changed their life. Redemption through pixels, communities formed, rituals emerged, belief blossomed. Then came the scammers, the rug pulls, the influencers who vanished with the holy loot. And the people, they were shocked, betrayed, but only briefly. Because belief doesn't die. It pivots, just like before. The toe, if it could think, would have been amused. Same playbook, different century, still no refunds. And so the relic lived on, not just in bone or blockchain, but in that timeless human longing. To feel special, chosen, connected to something ancient, sacred, and maybe, just maybe, profitable. The toe is still there, you know, not on display, not in a gilded reliquary, just somewhere, wrapped in linen, tucked into a box, forgotten by everyone except the one monk still tasked with dusting the archive. No more pilgrims, no more parades, no more miracle pamphlets fluttering in incense-thick air, just silence, and dust, and history, exhaling slowly into the stones. But it's not dead. Not really. Because relics, real or imagined, don't disappear. They wait. Quietly. Patiently. Like the part of us that still wants to believe in something. And we still do, don't we? We scroll past grinning spiritual gurus selling high-vibe water. We forward chain emails that promise luck if we send them to 7 friends. We pay extra for moon-activated yoga mats. We whisper mantras into apps and track our karma in spreadsheets. And every so often, we buy something absurd. Not because it's useful, not even because it's beautiful, but because someone told us it meant something. That's the relic, right there. That's the toe, wrapped in story, laced with longing, branded by belief. And it's not a bad thing, really. It's human. Gloriously, heartbreakingly human. The need to feel connected. To think that maybe, just maybe, this one object, this one moment, this one transaction could bring us closer to the divine. Even if the divine smells faintly of mothballs and mutton. So the toe remains, untouched, unquestioned. And one day, somewhere in the near future collapse of our next great system, someone will find it again, hold it up, blow the dust off, declare it authentic. A new wave of followers will emerge. There will be branding, limited editions, holy toe candles, maybe even a Netflix documentary. And once again, the coins will fall. Because belief isn't bound to time or to truth. It doesn't care about carbon dating or blockchain verification. Belief is a quiet hunger. And relics, no matter the age, are just the bones we wrap around it. And that was the story of the holy toe. How a leftover sheep bone became sacred. How belief became currency. And how, sometimes, the most divine thing of all is a really good sales pitch. They called it faith. They called it relics. But in the end, it was hype, wrapped in velvet, and sold with incense. Sound familiar? We've just replaced toes with tokens, bones with blockchain, and monk scrolls with Discord servers. Different packaging, same vibe. Thanks for drifting with me tonight. If you like this strange little detour into dusty miracles and velvet lies, tap that like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the weirdest relic, artifact, or token you've ever come across? Holy or digital, I want your best. And if you'd like to support this strange little corner of the internet, you can do it at ko-fi.com/napmax. It keeps the lights on and the sarcasm flowing. This is Napmax Sleep Stories. Sleep well, dream weird, and remember, even the most ridiculous things once made someone believe. Some still do.